Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number, hang on, I have to check, 155 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, to hear the Mistweavers tell it, Specs dead, move on.
It's not that bad, but it might be that bad. We'll see. We'll see.
Mistweaver, the eternal underdog, maybe would have benefited from having a really good tier set, and that sounds like that's no longer the case.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that today. There's some other stuff. There was a big community council interview about Mythic Plus that has some very interesting tidbits. They did actually nerf afflicted and incorporeal spawn rates, so we'll talk about that later. As well as just like patch 10.1 comes out in a week. Like if
Random stuff happened.
If you're watching this live, then obviously it's like a little bit more in the week. But if you watch this or listen to this after it goes up on the streaming service, like the video and podcast services, then it's gonna be literally a week. So yeah, so I guess we kind of jump into farm. But before we even really get into farm stuff, like talking about our raid weeks, this like duration of like farm period is really weird. Like it's not like
weird how
like Sepulcher was like we had like 4 weeks, right? That was too little. It was like so little that it was like, okay, we got to try and get everybody through CE, and that's the only thing that matters. We want to get people their CE achievements because those are going away. And then you have like a Sanctum of Domination or Nyalotha or any of these other tiers kind of farm length where it's just like on and on and on and on and on forever.
Yeah.
And you got this one that's like, I think we have had like 2 months, almost 2 months of farm.
Yeah.
This week, yeah, almost 2 months. And this tier is much nicer to reclear than basically any Shadowlands, any BOD or any BFA raid really, except for Nylo. That one wasn't bad. But it's just like we're at that awkward point where we're like, well, we kind of want to do some like fun like speed stuff, but there's like 1 week left, and it's a lot of effort, and we're gonna have to hit like prog stuff hard after that. So it's like, do I want to like put in that effort to like figure out, okay, how are we gonna do, Diurna much faster, Razageth much faster, when I need to then immediately turn around and like prepare for 9 bosses of heroic and like 2-3 bosses of mythic a week and a half later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's a weird length too. I'd say the length is weird because it's just enough where like we're feeling comfortable. We're in like our one night clears. We got our last CE person done this week.
Nice.
Which was our 5th healer that he just sits for everything. So it was funny getting him in there. But but yeah, no, it's I would agree. It's a weird length, but I mean, I will echo what you said. It's the one of the easier reclears. It reminds me of like what I think I've always talked about, which is like you are stronger than when you first did the fight. So like there's like you have acquired enough gear where like you have now cut off phases. You have, everything's just a joke. Nothing's really, too scary.
Yeah.
And things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a weird position, but yeah, we have like, I think like 3 or 4 more weeks. We made the decision we're gonna at least do 1 night a week up until 10.1 till the raid releases. And funnily enough, the main reason is because like the majority of my raid doesn't play outside of raids nowadays.
Yep.
So it's more of just like we need people to log in at least once a week because like if they don't, we will get rusty and we'll have a terrible like first couple raids. So it's more of just a like we just need people to come in and play the game for at least like a couple hours each week. So
yeah, we have a survey up in guild right now for what we're doing the week of 10.1. because there are some people that came to us and asked like, are we gonna take that week off? Raid? What are we gonna do? Some people don't want to, some people do want to, so we're like asking people what they want to do. But that's the only week that we off. We're raiding next week, but then it's like it's next week, and then there's the following week is 10.1, which raid is not out then. So
talk about that.
You can still do Vault of the Incarnates if you're still working on Cutting Edge. You can still get it that week. But yeah, so we will see what people would like to do, but we may not raid that week.
Not bad, not bad. Yeah, and then I literally farm wise this week was uneventful. As like I said, we got our last C person done, but then we back cleared everything. I think we were done in like 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours. Like limited wipes. Just a good easy night of farm. Did not get a mythic Diurna trinket. That sucks. Haven't yet to see another council trinket, another icon. That sucks.
At least Icon's not going to be like Icon's just a stat stick. You will get a better stat stick next tier. There may not be a better Broodkeeper's Promise or better Grief Torch. That's not guaranteed.
Oh yeah. We haven't seen a Grief Torch either, actually. So either of those trinkets were trinketless. We saw one, I think, on like our second kill. That's the only Grief Torch I think we've ever seen drop.
I think all of our Mythic Grief Torches have come from the vault.
Yeah, so stupid.
But we have gotten 2 bows to drop, 2 mythic bows.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, nice. Like this week, speaking of bows, all of our hunters posted out. Including our raid lead. Nice. So I did the raid leading on Friday for the most part, and that was an adventure. But we got through everything. It took us close to 3 hours, but we got through everything. It wasn't too painful.
Yeah.
Calling stuff on Razageth from tank POV is not ideal. But yeah.
No.
At least like in phase 1, where like it's the most important to be on top of calls. Like there's just like back to back mechanics. I'm playing Blood DK, and
nice.
You just like don't do the mechanics. So
that's pretty funny.
Makes
it a little bit easier. A little bit easier.
Yeah, there was at least one purgatory that didn't need to happen though.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But cool, yeah. I mean, it sounds like then you ended up one night clearing, I'm assuming?
Yeah, we one night cleared. Everything went pretty smoothly. Just gotta figure out what we're doing, I guess not this coming week, following week.
Yeah. Nice. Well, let me know. I guess we'll talk about it next week or the week after.
Yep.
Same place. But cool. I mean, we get a little bit of the news this week that occurred. There's been a lot of it.
Lights on the fritz again.
Lights. Stop it. I replaced it, by the way. I think the circuit's bad. Anyway, well, hopefully it'll hold, and if not, we'll go back in a dark room, Anom mode. So a couple things happened this week. A lot of news. Maybe we'll start with something outside the game, and then we'll go into Mythic Plus stuff like we mentioned. So there was a tweet from old Makes asking Quick and the Blizzard team about BlizzCon. And so basically Quick, who is the president, Mike Ybarra, of Blizzard, reiterated that BlizzCon is still, they're still committed to bringing back BlizzCon in 2023. Which basically means we should be seeing some announcements soon about it. I mean, traditionally BlizzCon has been held in the fall timeframe, so like the early November-ish was always sort of the weekend that it was, and yeah, so they're trying to basically bring it back, hopefully in person. We'll see. Hopefully in 2023, which would mean this fall. So, might be fun to go to BlizzCon. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, they are committed to bringing it back. So
yeah,
I don't know. Have you ever been to a BlizzCon? I guess
I have not. The one I was going to go to, I was like, so a bunch of friends went to the one in 2019, and I didn't go because I was working on my dissertation, and
Oh yeah.
like kind of like had priorities, had to respect them. And I was like, it's okay though. I'll be done with it next year. I can go to BlizzCon next year, and of course, next year is 2020, and that doesn't happen. So I've not been
Exactly.
to BlizzCon.
Gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I also have never been. Because funnily enough, most of my friends would have rather go to Dota 2 tournaments than BlizzCon. So um yeah, my friends that lived in LA would go, but like the group of us wouldn't really travel out. So I spent a lot of my friend travel time going to majors or going to the international in Seattle when it was held there. So
Nice,
um
nice.
so cool. But yeah, BlizzCon's back. Maybe you'll make an appearance this year. Maybe I'll make a trip. We can do a live episode of the Peak podcast out
Yeah,
there with some friends. So in person one maybe. Um cool. So then I guess the next big thing that happened this week, outside of a lot of the 10.1 like stuff that came out, was there was a large community council Mythic Plus interview with a bunch of different designers. So you had associate game producer Morgan Day, you had lead encounter designer Matt Villers, and then you had, I think, like co-lead or like second in command encounter designer Andrew DeSosa on the panel. And so the community council, basically they got together with community council, sort of a round table of questions, mostly centered on Mythic Plus and a lot of the design around it, like questions around how they think about it, things like that. And so there's a couple good sort of snippets. They did talk a little bit about, the idea of why they did seasonal affixes to start with, which I think most people are aware of. Like most of that was just because the map pool didn't change or the dungeon pool didn't change. The seasonal affixes were really meant to have you like reroute or relearn how to progress through a dungeon. Um, and sort of that was the change. And so what they saw with sort of season one, with the dungeons changing into season two, there's really no need for another seasonal affix because you have to learn all new dungeon routes, right? So they thought on top of doing that, plus um, having a seasonal affix, I think um, was sort of not something they wanted to also incorporate. So
yeah,
they did do the whole never say never thing about seasonal fixes not coming back. So
right.
um, we might see them back, but I think that was sort of Morgan's, general overview of the topic, which was like, hey, they they don't want you to have to learn the new dungeons plus also learn this new affix. So
Yeah, they also talked a bit about like the overall complexity of the dungeons, like and how affixes were interplaying with that, and some of them, like thundering, is actually really complicated to try to deal with. There's a not like it's not hard to understand. Like you get a buff, and you have to find somebody to clear your buff on before it expires, or you die basically. Um,
uh-huh.
but in the heat of combat, when you have three other affixes go or two other affixes going off, plus all of the trash stuff happening, um, the amount of decisions and thought you have to put into dealing with it is pretty high. And so all of these different like the affixes were compounding with just the complexity of the baseline Dragonflight dungeons. I think is the other thing, where you look at something like Court of Stars that's mechanically much simpler. It's like, you know, frontal hell, but it's not very mechanically complicated. Like like you look at a mob, what does it do? It has a frontal. That's it.
Yeah.
And like pretty much that's like 90% of the trash in that dungeon. So there's not a lot that you have to worry about when handling these other affixes aside from making sure you don't go in. Versus something like the trash in Ruby Life Pools, which has a much more
Right.
going on.
Yeah, exactly. And they do talk they sort of continue this when talking about affixes and the idea of like kiss curse affixes, like, or other sort of like removing old things from older dungeons because of the affixes, right? I think what they're trying to push for now is that the dungeons become the focal point of the difficulty, and the affixes add like a layer, or like they use the term texture, I guess, in their answer. But the idea is like the affixes sort of disrupt how you would handle certain mechanics in the dungeon, but the focus is still on the mechanics that are inside that dungeon.
Yeah, and
Um,
I hope that that's how it pans out.
yeah,
I would rather, with this seasonal model of rotating the dungeon pool every season, I would rather have the dungeons be the centerpiece and the affixes be much more minor. Um,
right.
and even actually, like, I don't mind fortified and tyrannical as much in the rotating dungeon pool model, because there's just not as much time to, you know, do the dungeons. So it's not like,
Yeah,
first season of Shadowlands, okay, you do tyrannical the other side the first time, you're like, ooh, that was kind of rough, and you figure out how to do it over the course of the season, and you get better at it, and you kind of like figure it out, and then it's just literally the same for the entire rest of the expansion. It doesn't change at all.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, or and it just becomes like I'll just skip it this week, right? Like it's one of
Yeah,
those things where it's like it just becomes if there's enough of an annoyance with the hotfix, you just end up skipping it.
right.
Um,
um
so so
but
yeah,
yeah, that's like, I hope that that's how it works out. I think they still need to do more de-escalation on some of the affixes, in their words, like de-escalating the complexity of those. But like, the stuff that they've already done is a pretty good start. So we'll see how it goes.
yeah. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So, I mean, I think that was a large majority of it. I think the other thing too is they talking about these kiss curse things is they don't. One thing Morgan I think mentioned as a part of his answer to this question because it was a sort of a roundtable, so a bunch of the designers gave answers. Was he sort of talked a little bit about the fact that like in dungeon with kiss curse, like your character could seem extremely powerful in certain situations, and like that power doesn't always translate to outside of a dungeon. And so the idea is like they don't want kiss curse affixes to make your character too powerful so that when you do something else outside of a dungeon, you seem weaker for whatever reason. So it's sort of like they're definitely thinking about it more holistically versus just in the blinders of saying, okay, within a Mythic Plus dungeon, this is what we want. It's sort of more of taking more of the game into account. And then also talked about the fact that like by not having as many kiss curse affixes, they can do more things with dungeon specific mechanics. Like they referenced like the barrels in Plaguefall or the necrotic wake weapons, right? Leaving those in allows those to be a bigger part of how you route the dungeon or do the dungeon. So again, probably all more in service of focusing on the dungeon itself being the focal point. So
Yeah.
um
They also they talked about checkpoints, and I want to briefly touch on this because, well, so I'm gonna like read the quote. At a very high level, we want our dungeons to feel like places, and part of that feeling like a real place is you traverse through it. It's not like I magically teleport through the dungeon. Our baseline is that we actually would not prefer or would prefer to not have updated release points and have more natural ways to get through the dungeon. Um, which is
uh,
very, I mean, on the one hand, like you think of something like Court of Stars. It has an updated release point. There's actually two of them. Um, Depending on when you die, you either respawn at the dock or you respawn just after the like on the other side of the bridge. The bad one.
yeah.
Somebody dies at the bad time, and then they're like isolated over there. But there's actually also a more natural way to get through that dungeon. That second spot that you release is just like up the stairs from the first spot that you release.
Right. Yeah.
It's up the stairs and through the door, but nobody pulls those. Oh wait, those go away. Do those go away? These centurions there.
I don't think so.
I don't think they do. But like,
I
if you
don't
kill
know
those
though.
centurions, you can actually go through there.
Yeah.
Um, so like, they've got some stuff like that, but it's like the respawn points. Like, I feel like this is something where you just have to give ground to the gameplay experience of, like, you look at uh, some of these dungeons and you like die and
Yeah.
you can't release because the run back is so long.
Yeah, and they talked about a little they talked this a little bit in actually reference to King's Rest, which I thought was an interesting one, where you
Yeah,
have like the spirit guy that puts you on a pterodactyl. But I think in general, like this idea of checkpoints really comes down to more the design of the actual dungeon layout versus anything else. Meaning like
yeah,
Quarter Stars is an easy one because they have that back door that
yeah.
opens once you
You
clear the
do a
first
loop.
boss.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do it, make it a loop, or like make the like don't make it a straight line type dungeon. Allow the encounter spaces to like loop back, because you can also do it in verticality. Like in the raid, you have like wind things that can shift you up and down
yeah,
levels, right? Which might again affect the layout. But I think a lot of the checkpoint stuff, the ones that are bad, like the dungeons that are bad where like you respawn all the way at the beginning and it's like a 30, not even 30, but if it's like a minute run back, that's literally absolutely ridiculous. So
yeah. And it's
yeah, I
like
mean
I don't think I want every dungeon to be a loop, right? I don't want every
yeah,
dungeon to be doing this like this kind of round and around, and you're at the top and there's a boss, or like the other way around, you loop around and around and you're bottom and
yeah,
there's the boss. Um, I But there are dungeons that are not designed like that, where there is no other way to more quickly reach where you're going, and you respawn, and it's just like have fun. Like Halls of Valor is one of the things that's very punishing in that is if you die, you go back to the spawn, and like yes, you can
yeah,
mount for like a third of your or half of your run back, but it's actually still just a very long run back if you like wipe on Herja, right? And you don't
or
have
any of the either of the wing bosses, right?
right.
It's like
Yeah.
yeah, it's a hike to get back there. Yeah, which I mean, I'm wondering if like they this may be something from like a design point of view of like putting in like a I'll use the term like fast travel, but
Right.
like still allow the ability to say like, hey, we're not just gonna let you spawn right in front of the boss every time you die, or like your
Yeah.
checkpoints aren't every like 6 feet, but like there
Yeah.
is a speed up mechanic where you're not just like running through the dungeon for like
Yeah.
45 seconds to a minute.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, like, it's funny because like Halls of Valor is not one that you really hear people complain about respawn points in, like the checkpoints in. And I feel like that's largely because if you wipe, you're not timing the key anyway, so it doesn't matter. Um, like,
kind of messed up.
where are you gonna wipe on that in that dungeon? You're gonna wipe on Herja or you're gonna wipe on Fenrir. At least doing like weekly key kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Like, you're gonna wipe on one of those two things. If you wipe on one of those things, you probably committed bloodlust to it, committed a bunch of cooldowns to it. Um, like odds are high that if you did that, like you're not timing the key.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's they I mean they talked a little bit about that same this is sort of all kind of interconnected, but they talked about that too in terms of like the timer updates they've made in the past, and like if they enjoy doing that. And I think they, the comment there was like, we don't want one wipe to mean you don't time the dungeon, which
Yeah,
is fair. But then you also have this contrasting view of checkpoints, which is like, well, the wipe might not cause you to miss the dungeon timer, the run back does,
yeah,
right? Like the loss of time for where you are at sort of potentially can cause that. So yeah, I mean, we'll I guess we'll see like in the future. Like I can't think of any runbacks currently that are like I hate them. I
yeah,
mean, Court of Stars is more annoying than anything, where you like you're kind of split from your group if you wipe at a certain time.
yeah.
But nothing like I mean, King's Rest was, I feel like, even with the skips, was still terrible to wipe in.
King's Test
Um
was
so
partially because you were doing like if you were actually doing that key at a decent level, you were doing like rogue skips, and
yeah.
that pterodactyl, like for one thing, it was positioned terribly for the trash that people actually did. So like
Yeah.
people all the time would like pull the trash when they were trying to use the pterodactyl, die again, and then have to try a second time. But then also it would take you over to the bridge, and um, then you would have to get rogue skipped again, and like
Yeah.
your shroud may not be back up.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see what they say. It's interesting to see their point on checkpoints, and then like not I guess not coming out to say they don't like them, but having like a very specific idea of how they want to use them.
Yeah.
which I think is not what the community would agree with.
And I mean,
I'll
so
say.
one thing that they do run into as well, and this comes up in Raid, is that with non-linear stuff, putting checkpoints in can actually be worse. Like if you're doing things out of order, out of the
Yeah.
expected order, you can end up with a checkpoint that's actually worse. This happens in Raid right now. If you use the skip, you go and you kill Razageth. Um, if you ever release again, you're back in the room after Razageth, and you have to go through like 2 teleporters in the flight path just to get back to
Yeah.
Aranog's room to start walking.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, sometimes they can be Razor a little bit. Yeah, I think a little bit different. So, um, I'm trying to think. There wasn't anything really else, nothing else big. At least in terms of topics. I think the only other thing is um, they did talk a little bit about like mechanical visibility in dungeons. And so they are looking at that. They are, taking it past it. I think they specifically called out Vortex Pinnacle, which is a lot of white on white
Yeah.
mechanics, like a wind boss, like a wind themed instance that's very bright and white.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's one of those things that
so
didn't matter doing heroics even back in the day.
yeah,
Like that wasn't what killed you in Vortex Pinnacle. It was the stupid lightning pyramid trash packs that
yeah,
people couldn't do. Um, but now with
exactly.
infinitely scaling, content, those things will absolutely kill you, and being killed by things you can't see is the opposite of fun. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So that is a couple of updates from the. I mean, it's a really good interview. I recommend taking a listen. A lot of good questions. So, and to be fair, I'll always say this: I love listening to Morgan talk about this game for whatever reason. So, I think it does a really good job of explaining stuff. Um, so cool. So moving on, I think a little bit moving forward a little bit.
Yeah.
We did get a couple of updates sticking with the Mythic Plus theme to Afflicted and Incorporeal. So we talked about this, I think, last week. Continue to talk about these affix, I feel like, but they both received ICDs, and then Afflicted specifically received a target cap or like a mob spawning cap. So for Afflicted, what they ended up doing was they capped the number of spawns at 2, and then they put in what appears to be a 15-second ICD on their spawn rate. Basically, with the affix, you will only ever see a maximum of 2 up at any one time, and then there'll be about 15 seconds between their spawns. I think is a good change. So
Yeah, both of these basically are cap at 2, reasonably high ICG. You can have 2 spawn at once, but it's
uh,
not guaranteed even in a large pool. And that all like that's good. I'm happy with that. That's like this solves the like capping in it to prevents the nameplate problem.
yep,
Um, it goes a long way, and that means that you can't end up in a situation with like Afflicted where normally you would be fine, but you just got an unlucky spawn where you had like 5 of them spawn and you only have a single dispel and
yeah,
you just like die. I mean, not literally die
exactly.
because it's just a haste debuff, right? But I mean, maybe you literally die because you might be doing something where you need that not being debuffed by 100% haste.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, this definitely helps in that regard in terms of like not getting behind on the spells and being able to stay on top of it. And then yeah, the incorporeal one too just makes it so like your CCs aren't like it's okay if you overlap a hard CC, right? Um, in incorporeal now because there's such a spawn rate
Yeah,
gap between the two. So
yeah. Um, One more thing that I think is pretty important to talk about. I don't think we will
oh,
take much time to go over, but there is a change coming in 10.1 to how uh, loot, like bind on pickup loot trading works. So currently, when you loot a piece that is bind on pickup, as long as you don't equip it or enchant it or anything like that, you can trade it to anybody else that was eligible for loot from that like boss or dungeon for up to 2 hours, and that timer doesn't continue ticking while you are offline. So you can go offline and 3 weeks later hop back on and still have an hour and 50 minutes left on your trade timer. Um, they are changing that in 10.1. It is now going to be 4 hours, but it will. Oh, Goodbye, Anomoly. Anyway, it's now going to be 4 hours, but it will continue ticking while you're offline. This is primarily targeted at the world first race kind of people that were doing buckets, where they would do a clear of the raid, give all of the loot to a single character, and have it log off. And they would do splits for days, and then take a full account, like full stock of what loot they had and who it could be traded to, and just like hyper optimize who it was given out to and give all the loot out um, after days of splits. Now they're only going to be able to do it, within 4 hours. It limits that ability a lot. But actually, like, if you're not abusing it, this actually is in many cases kind of nicer for kind of like regular guilds as well, because 4 hours is just like one of the things that we have had happen is that we'll get loot off of like Aranog or Primal Council or something, and it'll be on my character because that's how we do master loot stuff with group loot. Is it'll be on my character, and just we don't trade it to somebody because they're just out on the other bosses, and then we get to the end and like go to give it to them, and like a lot of the times it's fine. It's got like 5-10 minutes left. But there have been a couple cases that is just like as it's expired.
Just rots on you.
Yeah, and it's like I'm not going to be logging off during that. And 4 hours is enough that it's like that's the whole raid. That's the whole raid. Yeah. And that for most people, like very, very few people raid for more than 4 hours at a time. So
yeah,
that's going to be kind of nice. There is a downside though. There are times when it's like we've had loot to give out, somebody gets disconnected and we want to give it to them, and they can't get back on until the next day. And the current model, we can just keep it and log off. The new model, you will not be able to do that. They just
yeah. I mean, this is I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a great change for like regular guilds. It's a huge sort of like issue for your top end guilds that were basically what we saw Echo on Limit do this year, this tier, which was like, yeah, like you said, trade everything to one character, log them off, and then like later on in the week hand out the loot as needed. So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's a minor change. It's a good one. It's another change that reiterates that Blizzard really doesn't like top end guilds. Trying to ruin them.
I feel
them.
like in a lot of cases, I am opposed to them doing things to like loot that target top end guilds are doing, like make it so top end guilds can't do as heavy an optimization of the they get. In this case, I am actually okay with it because it does come with upsides for the rest of us. And yeah. I think that on balance it will be better. Obviously it would be better for like my tier of guild if it were just like 4 hours of online time and also didn't tick while you're offline. But if I had to choose between those two elements, I think 4 hours is the one that I would pick, because that's the one that you run into more frequently. Is like we're getting to the end of the raid and you're like, oh, okay, we actually need to like stop what we're doing. Somebody has to hearth out, summon the guy in that's supposed to get loot, and we trade the loot left the loot before it like finishes timing out. And like not having to deal with that is
yeah, and so I mean something we did this tier 2, and I don't know if you did this, which this will help with, is like we would just clear bosses, like just to like get through them on heroic and like not hand out loot until we took a break, because it just took too long in between bosses. So it was more of like, let's get as much as we can dead and then hand out loot. So this just helps.
Yeah, and that that's actually the biggest place we ran into this was on heroic doing exactly that. There's enough like trash takes enough time on Mythic. Often we just do loot during trash. But on heroic early in the tier while we were figuring out loot, everybody like needed everything. And you only had 2 hours. Well, if we kill Aranog in 2 minutes, then like from 8:02 to 10:02 is when we can give out that loot. And 10 o'clock is our normal like here's where we're taking our like mid-raid break. And so that would be when we do loot. We got like 2 minutes left to get.
Yeah. And yeah, this is one of those changes that I think there's only upsides to it. Like not it curtails what Blizzard wanted, which is like that whole idea of like stockpiling loot on a single character and then trading it later. And then also doesn't impact every other guild like with the change that they made. So only good things. Cool. A couple other like quick hitters here is the build this week for 10.1 was a release candidate build. I mean, we already knew the release date, but it's just good to see that they have essentially locked down the major features for this. So this is sort of, we're now into like just final tuning phase of PTR stuff. So good on Blizzard. They've gone gold with this patch, if you want to use a very archaic term, with game development. God, so just a quick aside, did you see that tweet from Diablo 4, the Diablo 4 Twitter?
About how they gone gold?
Yeah, they went gold. I'm like, what does that even mean anymore in today's day and age? Because there's going to be a day one patch and everything's on a server somewhere that you download. You're not pressing discs. Come on, boys.
I mean, they might be pressing discs. Do the Diablo 4 box copies have discs in them?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would assume
there was a period. I feel like there was this period in like the early 2010s where people were like selling games, and you went to the store and you bought a copy, and there literally was not a disc inside. It was just a box with a code, and I feel like the response to that was just negative. So everything, like, I haven't actually bought a physical copy. Maybe I'll go and I'll like buy a cheap game or something store and just see if it's got a disc in it.
That's so funny.
But I feel like I feel like they probably have discs, and that's having played in the past with a very bad internet connection. Having a disc and not having to download stuff over like shitty rural internet is nice.
That's fair. That's fair. It's just you just have to contend with like the day one patch anyway as soon as you install it.
But the day one patch for like the day one patch Diablo 4, but it's not going to be as big as like the whole game plus the day one patch.
No, that is true. That is true. The other thing that got released, so with this release candidate too, was they did do the opening cinematic. So the cinematic opening, it's actually called Opening the Way, which is how they open up the new caverns, how you get to or shows how the Zaralek caverns get formed or get open to us. Basically, it's like, for spoilers, I guess, like the 3 aspects that we're trying to kill, just punch a big hole in the ground and then they fly. Like,
I feel like we saw
it's honestly. I think we saw I think we saw pieces of this. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe that's why I'm confused.
Full cinematic's out now. We know it. It's officially in the game files. So go watch it if you care about seeing that type of stuff. It's cool. I mean, these villains seem pretty good, we'll say. Definitely better than the jailer. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's not saying much, but you know. There's also speaking of villains, a new support enchant showed up on PTR this week.
Why?
So I'm going to read what this says. Permanently enchants a weapon to cultivate living spores, causing your healing spells and abilities to occasionally send an invigorating spore cloud to your target. It will grant them 2,442 of their highest secondary stat for 20 seconds. Current proc rate is 2 procs per minute hasted. And you just know somebody's gonna get lucky and they're gonna have like 80% uptime on this, and people are gonna be mad.
Yeah. Or like I don't like, this has never been a thing in WoW of like the support class, right? Like I don't know if this model even works in World of Warcraft, honestly. But like this is what this plays into, that sort of fantasy of like you buff your allies and they're stronger because of you. Yeah. It's like the bard class of Dungeons and Dragons fame.
That was how people played Paladin in original Classic. That's not how people played Paladin, to my knowledge, in like the classic re-release, because it
Yeah.
was bad and not worth like having somebody sit there and just put blessings up on people.
Every 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I also didn't play classic beyond like leveling, so I don't know for sure that that's the case. But like, I don't think
Yeah. I mean,
that's actually how people played it. I think they just
no,
brought actual DPS.
yeah, it was either DPS or like you healed, right? Like it was a
Yeah.
paladin with a limited mana back then. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's a weird enchant. I mean, I don't foresee it being at 2 procs per minute hasted. Like that's still, I don't think the enough uptime on this. And because it's
Well,
random,
then you
you
have to
can't even
think
control
about
it.
there are 5 healers potentially in your raid.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you coordinate it, it becomes good. But
I mean,
again,
it's
it's
just
the
like somebody's gonna get lucky. I'm gonna have to deal with it, and I'm not happy about that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's fair.
That's
That's
it.
fair.
That's it. Uh,
It's not on the meters though, so healers don't use it because all that matters are healing meters. No, I'm joking. I mean maybe it ends up being played at the highest level, and if you can get all 4 or 5 year healers to use it, maybe the secondary stats are enough to make it good. But
I can't wait to find
yeah,
out that it like this just came on PTR, right? So there's still a lot of stuff to figure out. I can't wait
yeah,
to find out the like Gift of the Ox or Celestial Fortune triggers it, and then just like
yeah.
being asked like I'm already on my DK. Okay, I'm playing an off meta what are they called, crafted item. I'm using the allied chess player generosity that just like gives 5 people near you versatility.
That's funny.
And I did that because I originally needed to take off my Frostfire belt because of the slow that
Oh,
could
for
cause
Raz,
problems.
yeah.
Well, that kind of, but also Kurog specifically, the one where like you could slow
Okay.
Kurog and make it screw up the intermission. It was like, that was no bueno, so I made the chest plate to replace it. So I was like Lariat plus chest plate, and now I don't have any chest plate loot, so I am still using it. But
So funny.
like so there's like those things that exist now, but yeah, it's that's much that chest plate is much smaller, spread over many more people. So yeah. Anyway,
Nice.
do you want to talk about
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the Mistweaver change?
Yeah, we can jump into it. So yeah, so the I think one of the big topics we had today was there was a change this week on PTR to Mistweaver. Basically two changes, which were one was weird. I think they just missed a couple spells with it, and then the other one was the 2 piece. So we'll go over the 2 piece, I think, change first. It's a bit more impactful. So our 2 piece tier set bonus, if you weren't familiar with it, was a 4% chance on any renewing mist. Tick to proc. Essentially, I think it's a 3-second buff. Now they've changed the duration, but it's a 3-second mana return buff. Where you got 3% of your mana over 3 seconds. But so that was sort of the original buff, and what they ended up doing was adding an ICD to it. So the 2 piece now is an internal cooldown of 6 seconds, which means it can't proc any more frequently than every 6 seconds. And so this has sort of a ton of different implications. And so there's a couple, I guess, before I go into those, there's a couple interactions just so folks are aware is that the 2 piece buff did also proc your 4 piece, and your 4 piece was a 6-second buff of 40% increased Vivify healing. And so there was like an interaction of using the 2 piece procs to not only get mana back, but then to also proc additional healing to Vivify. Um, and so what a bunch of people were playing around with on PTR and in the raid testing was sort of a new play style built around this 4 piece or having this 4 piece. The playstyle essentially it's a little bit more nuanced than what I'll describe here, but I'll describe it at a high level so people get an idea of like it. At least it was a change in the way we bursted our healing. The in between these bursts, you'd play very similar of rising mist and sort of like continue to extend hots and stuff like that. But the actual burst windows now with this 4 piece would be to essentially trigger Yulan. So you'd use invoke Yulan, which is wildly different. Spam out a bunch of enveloping mist with Yulan active for both the enveloping breath healing, but then also the mana cost reduction on enveloping mist. you'd be playing Clouded Focus with this too. So you'd get additional mana reduction on Enveloping Mist on top of that, which was great, along with additional healing, of course. And by also telling you to Rapid Diffusion, every one of those Enveloping Mists would proc a Renewing Mist. So you could spread, I think it was like 6 or so Renewing Mist just off a single Soothing Mist channel plus Enveloping Mist spam.
Okay.
Could Rising Sun kick right after that to extend all that and proc another Renewing Mist. Um, and then you're set up with, easily without anything coming into it, probably 6 to 10 Renewing Mists out on the raid, um, with a proc of your 4 piece. And then you just, again, leveraging Clouded Focus, Soothing Mist channel on somebody and spam out Vivify. And now you're doing 40% increase healing, plus the Clouded Focus increase healing, plus down the fact that you have half the raid blanket and Renewing Mists on a 1 minute cooldown. And it's extremely mana efficient too, because Clouded Focus also reduces mana costs of this stuff. And with Yu'lon reducing mana costs, Enveloping Breath, your setup is also mana efficient too. And so all of this comes together with that to be like, oh man, this is a new play style. It's now burstier on a minute cooldown. It's a ton of throughput that's needed. Seems to be lining up with the way fights are laying out right now with their damage patterns, which is great. So that was sort of the other side of this. This is great in a theory crafting or hypothetical world, but it also is aligning in the real world. And it's a fairly easy thing to play. I mean, it's definitely different, not wildly different, but somewhat different to the way we've played up until this point in Dragonflight. But it was a new play style. It was fun. It was great. And so now you're thinking, Anom. It's a 6-second ICD. That's a long time, but does it completely break this interaction? And while it doesn't completely break it, it makes it a little bit less or a little bit harder to ensure you have the buff up during these windows. And the main reason is that with the ICD and the fact that the 4-piece bonus only lasts 6 seconds, there will be gaps in where you will not have the 40% increase in Vivify healing. And those gaps, I mean, right now we can't really, I mean, based on, I think, our limited, we haven't been able to do raid testing, or was there raid testing this week?
There was.
There was. So there's a little bit of raid testing. So we have a little bit of data from it, but the gaps seem large enough in terms of the actual way this will play, that like this isn't particularly viable or doesn't have the same sort of oomph or HPS sort of ceiling like we saw pre-nerf. Which basically means, while it's still probably theoretically the highest HPS build we can run going into 10.1, the more practical matter of the playstyle is it's not that much better than what we currently play today. And what we currently play today is a lot easier to set up. It's a lot easier to play. And so there's this balance of like, hey, we can do, 100K, these are made up numbers, but like 100K HPS with this crazy Yu'lon, Yu'lon, like Clouded Focus build, or we can do 90K HPS with the old build. And it's like, well, it's not that big of a difference. Does the 10K really matter for life and death? And it may end up, we don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ICD I think is a huge just killer for this build. So
we were talking about this a little bit before I turned on the stream of the kind of implications of this. So it basically took your 4 set from being something you could pretty well rely on being up when you were doing this ramp,
yep,
to being something where now it's going to have gaps, and that means that sometimes you will high roll having that buff up for the whole time, and sometimes you will low roll and you'll get your 1 proc, maybe you won't get any actually, but it's made the introduction of the ICD has kind of paradoxically made it higher variance.
Yep.
It's not, so there's a lot of old ICD trinkets from like the Warlords of Draenor and MoP era where I think I like the way that you put it earlier, and they have an ICD and an insanely high proc chance, and it's basically just an unused trinket that you don't have to push.
Yeah,
like it's got a 90-second ICD. It's got like a 30% chance to proc. By the time your ICD is up, you cast 5 spells, you're 90-something% guaranteed to have triggered it. And so it's basically just an unused trinket that you don't get to push when you want to. So there's that where like those old ICD ones were very, 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 very consistent. Um,
Yep.
and then this is very different from that, where it's gotten ICD, but now it's because of how much you care about having it in that short window while you got Yulan out and you're trying to do this ramp. It's made it very hard variance because you can't control, that going off.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people will point to the fact that like, okay, the ICD on the two piece is every 6 seconds. The buff from the four piece is 6 seconds, so it should line up. And the problem there is that the proc chance on the two piece is low enough that you can't always do that same guarantee we would see in the past with ICDs,
Right.
without like the high the ICD trinkets with a high proc rate. So there will be gaps, and like that gap is enough to pull this sort of build back closer to Chi, which is what I think they wanted. But to me, it just seems heavy-handed in, and this is more of a personal thing for me. I generally dislike ICDs primarily because all of my experience with them has been with these high proc chance trinkets, where it's like, just don't give me a proc per minute rate. Like, just say like every 90 seconds, this thing will happen, whatever it ends
Yeah.
up being. That to me, that's what ICDs are. And so I think if I were Blizzard taking a look at this, right, and I don't think the mana return is as much of an issue now. I think they've got the mana return portion of the two piece where they want it. I think now it's the fact that the two piece and four piece interaction, they're trying to rein that in. And
Okay.
is in my mind, it would have been better to just lower the proc chance of the two piece to a point where they felt happy with it rather than put this ICD on it. And the reason I say it that way is that I would have rather played the game where there was a chance for like an insane high roll versus now I basically know with this 6 second ICD, every probably 8 to 10 seconds I'll get a proc regardless. Right. And it won't be consistent. I won't get sort of strings of them, but every 8 to 10 seconds, get a proc, great. Um, I'd rather see like, I don't know, some sort of like ability to string like 5, 6, 7, 8 procs are in a row, and you have like, 30, 40 seconds of your six piece where you're just blasting.
I mean, you technically can because of the 6 second duration and 6 second ICT, right? Like you can have it out and get lucky and just have it proc exactly more or less on the ICT, and like maybe you have a few millisecond gap, but it's Vivify, right? You're probably not fitting a Vivify into that, you know,
Yeah.
200, 300 millisecond gap between one expiring and the next getting applied. Um, but I think the bigger issue in my mind is that when you're trying to, like, the average uptime doesn't like matter that much when you're trying to do a ramp kind of thing, unless
Yeah.
it does end up in practice being something where you can just rely on having it for the ramp, like having your Vivify ramp that you're doing be arbitrarily 40% worse. uh that sucks. Like that's actually kind of make or break. And I mean, I guess it's not technically 40% worse because like how much of that Yulan ramp window is Vivify healing and how much is the other healing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's most of it's going to be on the second half of that, right? The Yulon
Right.
piece is just for the reduction. So yeah, and I think I mean, the other thing is like people have said, like you can, pretty much cover a lot of this with like Thunder Focus because four piece will also proc off drinking a tea. So you could drink Thunder Focus tea or Mana tea, right? And that should proc it, but
Do those respect the ICD,
it's
or is the ICD just for the two piece?
the ICD is just on the two piece, not on the
Okay.
four piece.
Okay.
So there is the ability to like do it that way, but that's just another complexity of like making sure your ramps also include
Cover
those
both of
buttons.
those, yeah.
Yeah. So it's I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm complaining. At the end of the day, it won't be a huge deal. It seems like a heavy-handed nerf, super late, and almost like to me there are more elegant ways to limit the power than just slapping an ICD on it. I think that's my biggest issue with this is like it's the way they went about it versus the actual fact that, hey, yeah, maybe they were right that this power needs to be reined in a bit, but
Yeah.
slapping an ICD on it seems, I'm not going to say, well, I think in the pre-show, like when we were talking, I think I called this lazy design, which is probably selling Blizzard a little short. But it's just like, I would have rathered a different approach to to limiting
Yeah.
the power of the 4-piece. So
They are like kind of similar. We talked about last week. They removed it, just removed explosive. I think we are running into the just lack of time for these patch releases. And like I don't necessarily want them, like I wouldn't mind if 10.1 were like 2 weeks later. Personally. But it if they're sticking to this timetable, they do eventually just have to say like, okay, we just have to do something, put an ICT on it, and call it a day. And it's not going to be the best thing in the world or the cleanest design, but it will work and it won't break the game.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And that's like, I could definitely empathize with the like not wanting to have kind of a bit of a miss of a tier piece. But yeah, it's yeah. Speaking of, actually, this is totally off topic. Why does Mistweaver get all the tea?
I don't know, actually. That's an
like,
interesting one.
You brew tea. Why doesn't Brewmaster get any tea? Why is Brewmaster like all beer?
I think it's so I think it's a thematic playstyle thing where Brewmasters focus more on like the drunken brawler style.
Right. But we have purifying brew that removes the like stagger
drunkenness.
Damage. Yeah,
you're like staggering.
Yeah,
you're drunk.
You use it to like get some of that drunkenness off. Why is that not a tea? I mean, obviously, I kind of know why. It's so that they have,
true,
as much as they can, a reasonably clear tooltip. The things that say reduce brews would all be like worse if they said reduces brews and teas or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, no, that's interesting. I don't. Yeah, I think Mistweaver is just like we're the ones like bringing people back to health, and so like traditionally tea has brought people
medicinal
back to health. So like we are like the medicine men of the monks, you could say. So
fair enough.
So yeah,
fair enough. Another pretty big late change that I forgot about before the show. They are doing the thing. You remember the thing they did before Dragonflight? They came out, they were like, okay, listen, basically we want to nerf healers by 20%, but we don't want to just like put a patch note that says all healers are nerfed by 20%. So we're increasing the HP of all players, increasing their personal healing by that amount too, and increasing the damage taken by that amount as well. And so it's just like, you know, the healers do less relative to people's HP, but the number stays the same.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're doing that again. Which is really okay, there's actually one thing that's different this time that is worth mentioning, and that is that we don't know that the actual damage increases are going to be in line with what they were when they did this initially. Because one of the things they talk about is burst healing. Like they are trying to avoid ending up in a situation where you're either full or you're dead. And this is something that happened on Razageth. There's a number of overlaps where like in phase 1 on Mythic Razageth, there's the bombs, immediately into volatile sparks, and if you have electric lash during that just chips away like 50k health, you're just dead. Like over like a 5-second period, which is not like one shot necessarily, but the bombs into sparks is very rapid, and you have to move for both of them.
Yeah, which is crazy.
So they're like burst damage in raid is very real right now. That is a very real threat to player survival. I like the Wowhead post is like and enemy damage, but they didn't actually say that the enemy damage is also going up, because like if they're trying to deal with enemy damage being high and spiky, it wouldn't make sense for them to also buff it by the same amount if it's already high and spiky. if it's not already high and spiky and they're like, healers can deal with it too easily, we need to nerf healers, then we'll see the enemy damage increase.
Yeah.
This post came out before raid testing this week, and I have not gone back and looked, but we did actually have a retest of one of the bosses. Retested Rashok with some changes. So, you know, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but actually I could just go pull it up real quickly while we're here and just look, you know, did Rashok damage go up by 25%? Because like that's like, if it didn't go up by 20%, then, or 25%, then like it's more of just buffing players' health, and that's not as bad.
Right.
Logged into the wrong account.
No, I'm almost positive that this included a damage buff too.
Yeah. I don't know, we're gonna see. I wouldn't be surprised to see like all the 10.0 stuff get buffed by that amount, just to keep that the same, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
I didn't double check raid damage, but I mean, like, I think it's I I understand why they're doing this in terms of like the only way to pressure healers at this point is to basically make those sort of like yo-yo type. You're going to take damage, it's almost going to kill you, you need to be healed up, and you're going to take another big hit of damage like in a short amount of time. So that's like testing the healer's reaction time to everything.
right.
um I don't particularly I sorry, I don't like that style of healing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I
I
don't like
think
it.
I th- yeah, I think it's much better if it's like either sometimes people use the term rot damage, but it's one of those things where like you live through a mechanic and then you have a breather to heal people up. Meaning like there are some mechanics where you need to be top 4 going in,
Yeah.
but once you get through it, like not being topped is okay for a couple seconds before the next thing comes in. There's sort of like a period of time between that. So um but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
along with this change, they also literally changed almost every healing ability for like non-healers, or
Right.
like health-based abilities were sort of, we can say nerfed, but because of the stamina increase, they're basically just kept baseline. So like, for example, like the chi cocoons from casting Evoke went from 10% of a player's HP to 8% of a player's HP, which essentially is a 25% nerf, but it means it's still uh shielding the like the same amount pre and post stamina increase.
Yeah.
The same like absolute amount, sorry.
The other thing that you see is a lot of player like non-healer person abilities got buffed. Gift of the Ox got buffed. It's not actually in the patch notes, but it did. Celestial Fortune got buffed.
Oh.
Like all these things, and it's just all in line with the increasing HP without increasing healer throughput. Um, but yeah. So interesting thing. I have pulled up these Rashok logs, right? I have one from April 7th here. And I have one from April 21st, which is this past Friday. So this is the testing way before they did these things. Apologies for the like random junk sort. And so we can look at these abilities and actually see what potentially changed. And it's probably worth, because like there's stuff happening throughout the fight. If we look at like the first major like thing where they're in the conduit doing the thing, one of the things that's really interesting here: conduit flare, average hit 46k, total damage is like 15.7 million. I didn't place exactly the same time frame. It's close. Conduit flare, like there's fewer hits here, which is weird, but it's actually very similar amount. It's again, the average hit is around 44k. So like I'm not exactly sure what to read into this, but if you compare the numbers, right? Like the overcharged, again, 44k, overcharged 37k. So that one is higher. Charge Smash, but also there were boss changes, right? It's hard to make a one-to-one comparison. Charge Smash is the jump that he does. And that went from 112k to 231k. Like that doubled, and that's obviously not in line with the health changes.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably one of the other ones that's interesting to look at is melee attacks. Those, like if you look at the raw damage that they did to the tank, so that's before mitigation and all of that, it was around 870k after the change. Before the change, it was around 700k, we'll say. So that did go up, but you know, not by 20%, 25%. It's like, it's weird. It's I don't know. It is strange.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and maybe they just touched like. This is another thing because like the note says all creature spell damage and melee damage increased, right?
Does it?
So
I
like,
didn't see that in the note.
yeah, it's in
Am I
like
just blind?
it's in like
Oh,
the
it is
top
in there.
part
Wow,
of
I'm
the
an idiot.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, and that's why when you say like creature, there's always the application of that in like Blizzard speak of like what is considered a creature.
Yeah.
So like,
There's
do
also
bosses fall into that, or is it just
the question
instance guys? So
of whether that, like, I think that everything in 10.0 will get a 25% buff to basically exactly match how things work relative to player health pool. I guess my main question is like, for next tier content, is it going to be tuned 25% higher, which doesn't do anything about keeping you from getting bursted down? It's just
yeah,
like a healer nerf at that point? Or is it going to be lower, like somewhere in between, maybe a 0% and a 25% nerf, so that it's less likely to just like YOLO one-shot something, right?
gotcha. Yeah, yeah, I think that's the idea is that like you'll have more health. So like, well, everything does more damage, you will have more health. So like, it only should become an issue as scaling becomes higher in content.
I mean, if they buff damage and health by exactly the same amount, the only change to the equation is the amount that healers can do. So I guess
That's true, actually.
there's two ways it could go, right? It's either they already had the damage where it was bursty, and if they want to deal with burst, if it was already bursty, then they need to buff health without buffing damage.
Right.
But the other thing that it could be is that they were looking at it and going like, we need the players to be taking more damage in order for healing numbers to make sense and not end up in situations like we did in Eternal Palace where people were like 2 healing prog bosses. Like you remember the 2 heal Queen Ajara, stuff like that. And so if they're like, well, we can't increase damage anymore. Like if we increase damage anymore, then it will be like very rippy and one-shotting players, but we have to increase the amount of damage taken so that there is a role for healers to fill.
Yeah.
Then, you know, they can buff both, and it's not going to result in, assuming they aren't already bursting people down, it's not going to result in people getting bursted down. It's just like if they're at that point and realize if we don't do something, people are going to be 1 and 2 healing fights. Speaking of, honestly, 2 healed Broodkeeper Diurna this week.
Yeah, I saw that.
Holy shit.
Guys are crazy over there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get the reason for this change. I just don't like mid expansion changes like this because they never get it right across every healer. And so like the idea is like now any health based like ability that didn't get sort of adjusted is now just better, flat out
On
better.
the upside, they already went through this with 10.0, so they actually were on top of pretty much all of the tank stuff. I don't think they missed any of the tank stuff. The one thing that was not in the notes was Gift of the Ox, and that did get an actual buff in the spell data. So it
Gotcha.
just got missed from the notes, but it did actually get buffed in a way that corresponds. Like it's a net neutral change, but
Uh-huh.
Gifted the Ox spawns based on like damage taken, right? So if you're you would be getting less of them basically without a change.
Yeah, I know for heal. I mean, for healers, they hit a couple of them, but like for Mistweaver, they didn't hit Life Cocoon. They just hit Cheat Cocoon, which is from our Invoke. They didn't touch Rewind for Evokers, which is like a big one.
Right. Rewind is the
Um,
one that I've heard a lot about. The healers in my guild are not
yeah.
happy about that one. Like, Rewind is based on damage taken. Um,
Yep.
and so it just got even better.
Yeah. Got to keep the new class on top, you know. But yeah, no, I mean, I ultimately, I mean, they did this for scaling reasons, right? Is what they said. So I mean, we'll see how it plays out. Um, in like the larger sort of scheme of things, we'll say with the raid, but it's not. I don't know. It's just a change you got to deal with at this point, right? It affects everybody.
Yeah.
Um, maybe not everybody similarly, right? I don't know about tanks, but like
Yeah.
for healers, it's not the same impact, but everybody's got to play around it. So
It's I would say it doesn't impact tanks like equally because there's differences in the amount of reliance on external healing. Look at something like a Blood
gotcha.
DK that currently doesn't rely too much on external healing. You need some of it, like your own self sustain is net negative over time, but you can go quite a while before running out of health.
Right. Yeah.
And this change is like they are already not super reliant on external healing, so the drop in external healing is not going to be a problem. Versus something like Brewmaster that has historically been very reliant on external healing. Um, Although Brewmaster now is in a much, I would say, healthier place in relation to external healing, where like you look back at BFA and like you needed people to be keeping that stagger healed off of you. You needed that external healing constantly all the time, or you would die in pretty short
Right.
order. And it was very smooth damage, but it would just kill you if you weren't getting healed pretty consistently. Brewmaster has a lot more self sustain now between Celestial Brew and things like the Strength of Spirit talent, um, different talents that increase the number of good Ox Orbs that you get, um, and stronger cooldowns across the board. Like there's actually a Brewmaster tanks in general got power crept quite a bit, which is good because they were awful. But they got power crept pretty good, and Brewmaster is no exception. So it's I think it still is one of the ones that needs the most external healing attention, or like most consistent external healing attention. But it has a much better ability to deal with gaps in that. So like one of the things that would happen, kind of pre Celestial Brew, is you would be taking a lot of damage as the tank at the same time as a lot of raid damage was happening,
Uh-huh.
and that would get you killed because you were going to take your entire health bar and damage over a like 12-second period, and in that 12 seconds, zero healers were paying attention to you, and there was nothing you could do really um to cope with that in a reasonable way. Versus now, that same scenario, you have Celestial Brew on a very low cooldown that can get you through that. You have even just one Gift of the Ox Orb at low HP does a very substantial chunk of healing, and you can very reliably have access to that. So I think it'll be okay. I think that there's going to be a little bit of rich get richer with the tanks, so they're good at self-sustaining on their own, like Protection Paladin and Blood DK.
Huh.
And stuff like Guardian Druid and Vengeance get a little bit worse because they don't. But it's not going to be like make or break. Like if Brewmaster were still in the BFA kind of situation where you needed external healing, I would be screaming bloody murder. Uh, but we're not.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. So I mean, I guess we'll have to probably play with this a little bit more. Um, once it's live and see. But yeah, I mean, to your point, they seem to have gotten most abilities updated with the stamina changes, so now they're similar to what they were before. Um, so cool. And then I don't know. I think the only other just the final thing was something that confused me. So I wanted to bring it up here, which is the actual like release schedule for
Okay.
10.1 and how that works. So we had it for 10.0, but actually somebody asked in Peak this morning and I told them the wrong thing. So I sort of wanted
Ooh.
to clear it up here. But it was specifically around like Mythic Plus, right? Which was basically the idea that what how do you handle the next couple weeks of Mythic Plus, right? So like to give out dates, the 10.1 goes live May 2nd, which basically means for season 1, all the titles, awards and things like that for Mythic Plus are finalized on May 1st. So basically like sometime at the end of the day on May 1st, they will sort of take a snapshot of where you're sitting from a rating perspective in Mythic Plus, and that'll be how they give out rewards for Mythic Plus.
Generally, it will be
Um,
probably during they'll do like extended maintenance for the patch release, and it'll generally be that,
yeah.
which will be on the morning of the second, although it might snapshot from before that on the first. Also,
Yeah.
EU is different. So EU time,
Oh yeah, sorry.
and then Taiwanese Korean time, the China region, like Taiwanese Korean time is Wednesday, EU times sorry, Taiwanese Korean is Thursday NA time. And
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry.
those are
I'll be using the NA times and dates for this,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, you can translate into your region, which that means the patch will be live, May 2nd, that Tuesday for North America, with all of the older dungeons and raids, right? So that's I think the biggest thing is that like you essentially have a dead week between May 2nd and May 8th or 9th. Where like it's the old season 1 dungeons. You can't increase your rating to affect sort of the rewards you get. And so people are asking like what do we need to do in that interim week to set us up for the start of season 2? And the idea is basically, in previous expansion or previous sort of seasonal crossovers, there's been I think it's been a 4 key level degradation, right? So like
Yeah.
for example, if you wanted to ensure you had a level 20 key for the start of season 2, you need to complete a level 24 during the first week of 10.1. So the between May 2nd and May 8th, right? For us NA folks, and translate that to the EU and Taiwanese or Korean region. So yeah, so it's going to be the old season 1 dungeons during that week, completed 24. It means you set yourself up to at least get a level 20 key at the start of season 2 to push up and try and complete. So,
Yeah.
um,
Because of the
so yeah,
change to like because of how the vault works, there's two things. The first week of 10.1, you're gonna want to do keys for gear. Um and keys for gear means doing lots of keys more so than doing specific high keys. So like
yep,
probably the ideal scenario for a lot of people is to kind of, at least at the mythic level, is probably to like suffer through a 120 to get the 120 vault slot. Depending on tuning, final tuning will have
yeah,
will say like if you're eye level 420 right now, um it may be that 20s are actually okay week 1. It's hard to say yet. But like probably
yeah,
want to like suffer through a 20 if you can get it. And then otherwise like whatever key level, like very much like Diablo style, like whatever key level you can clear quickly. Like if you ever go and look at the like Diablo Reddit and people are asking like what greater rift level shall, which one can you clear in 3 minutes or less?
yeah,
And
exactly.
it's like, you do that one because getting more gear from those is better, and you just go as high as you can while still being efficient about it. Because doing like a 2 hour, no lever, you only do so many of those in a week. But if you're doing like a 20 minute, like 20-minute keys, you can do 6 of them in the same time. And
Exactly.
that's just like
Yeah.
way more loot.
Yeah, exactly. So you definitely be efficient. I say that first week, but yeah, in the interim week, I'd say if you care about pushing Mythic Plus, particularly into season 2, get your 24 done. If you're missing any gear, like you could fill out your vault that week. 'Cause I believe your vault the week of the 8th will just be the old loot pool
Yes, it'll be
for
season one
that
loot.
vault.
Yeah.
Season 1 vault, yeah, both loot and item level, unless they break something. Um,
Wouldn't be the
which
first
has
time,
happened.
but
Yeah,
it feels like they've mostly got that sorted out. We haven't had like, oops, I got new season loot in my vault issues in a while.
exactly. Yeah. Um, so yeah, so that's sort of I guess what I wanted to cover here quickly, just because I basically gave the wrong answer in peak to start with. So clear up everything here, make sure everybody's on the same page just with me. And then yeah, it's we're closing in. It's like what, one more, or I guess it's like one more week till the patch. So like
Mm-hmm.
we'll have one more 10 dot what 0.7 week of stuff, and then
Yeah.
new stuff in 10.1, new zone, new, I don't know, things to do, which we've talked about. So yeah, it's exciting. Love new content releases, love new raid release time. So
Yeah. It's going to be an exciting couple weeks. I got to start working on boss prep, like serious mode boss prep.
yeah, I was actually just gonna ping today in my guild to start uh at least in healers, because that's who I care about. I don't care about anything else, but
Yeah.
start to pull together resources that we have for ourselves. So
Oh, random plug. If you are a Viserio patron, Viserio's healing sheet and raid assignment sheets he just posted this morning. So, like, not
oh,
final versions, but like this is like a ready for raid release version. So if you are a
interesting.
patron, you get those today and you can start working with them. If you're not a patron, you get them next week when he publishes them for everybody. But those are an incredibly good resource. If you are not familiar with them and you're rating at the like mythic level, I don't think it's as important for AOTC. You just don't need that kind of assignment complexity for AOTC. I wouldn't AOTC. But if you're like trying to push mythic content, it is worth taking the time to go and check out those spreadsheets and figure out the assignments and figure out who's supposed to do what jobs and not try and figure it out mid range.
Yep. Yep. No, that is awesome. So I'll have to check that out then. So cool. Um
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I think it's closing in, or it's that time to start thinking about the next raid. And
yeah.
oh gosh, fun times, fun times. So
But
yeah.
that is going to be it for the show today. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you all for watching and or listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it and the other things that we do over at the Peak of Serenity and potentially help Anomoly fund a new light bulb,
Yeah.
you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come join the Discord. It is the best place to go and bully Anomoly.
Yeah. Okay.
He's
Okay.
always there, always watching, always listening.
I am always around. So
The Ecopticon, if you. Um, but that is going to be it for our show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
bye.